Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Thursday, June 13th. 24, yes. Thursday the 13th, the superstitious, well, no, that doesn't happen. The 13th falls on different days of the week, but Thursday, it's very close to Friday, so it's semi-spooky, and you should sort of watch out for things, I guess. That's my best advice for you. I can't guess at what people might think about that. There's plenty to round up today. Of course, it is a Thursday. Greg Dworkin will be visiting and helping us take care of that. No more primaries on Wednesday. They don't do that. So we're caught up on that respect, in that respect. Yesterday's activity, though, we were warned ahead of time on Tuesday when we spoke with Joan what they'd be spending their time on Wednesday, and they went ahead with the House vote to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. Of course, it goes nowhere. Longtime listeners of the show remember very well that we've been over the mechanics of how you charge someone statutorily with a contempt of Congress. The criminal complaint, such as it is referred to the Justice Department, and in fact, Merrick Garland actually works there. So I don't know if you all knew that, but it's up to the Justice Department to decide whether or not to assign someone to the case and whether or not they will prosecute. And there are also, in addition to just being like, well, I don't really want to do that to my boss or to myself or whoever makes the decision, there's always that, but there's an actual legal basis to it as well, in which they say, well, in this specific instance, for instance, what they're requesting of us is simply not something that we're authorized to release, and it doesn't make good sense for prosecutorial discretion in any case. If you wanted to press the case, you wouldn't want to release the tapes until you got to court. And if you don't want to press the case, then what is preventing you from releasing those audio recordings? And remember, do you remember what's at stake here? When the special counsel, appointed by Merrick Garland, by the way, Robert Hur, interviewed President Biden about the documents that President Biden himself alerted the archives that he had found had been inadvertently taken with him to his vice presidential post term office, I guess. I don't know. What do you even call it? Anyway, and some of them with him to his home as well. And I imagine this happens fairly frequently now that everything in the world is classified. But once he, knew that the case was proceeding against Trump, he said, well, that could happen to anyone. We should do a search. They affirmatively searched, found the documents, proactively alerted the government to it, and then returned them when asked. You see, that's the big difference. Anyway, Robert Hur interviewed him, and in the end, the upshot was, and there was some controversy swirling around that too, the decision was, well, we're not going to prosecute. It's just not going to hold up in court. There's not a lot of chance that we don't strongly enough believe that a jury will weigh all this evidence and say, yeah, this was a criminal act. Whereas we think we can make that case with Trump, of course, partly because he obstructed our investigation into the documents and then obstructed our efforts to get them back, whereas that was not the case with Joe Biden. And you remember that the controversy was that Robert Hur surmised that, well, he could get to court and say, ooh, I'm an old man and I just forgot, and that would be enough for a jury, which Republicans then conflated into, well, Robert Hur says that he interviewed Biden and found him to be mentally incompetent, essentially, and that the jury would conclude this because he had concluded it, which is not the case. Anyway, they got a full transcript of the interview, but they want the tape, probably because they think it makes him, they'll be able to find some clip that makes Biden sound like he's not got it together, although usually when he speaks, it comes together in the minds of the listener. Everybody kind of understands. Whereas with Donald Trump, you don't know what the hell's going on. Whether it's a written transcript, audio is usually worse. But anyway, they want the raw audio. And one of the problems is, of course, the Justice Department policy is, well, we certainly wouldn't be releasing this thing ahead of a trial if we thought that there was a case to be made. We would hold out for releasing it in court where it makes a difference. When we're not going to charge somebody, then we definitely don't just pass out the evidence on the person. If there's no charge being brought, then there's no business for the Justice Department to scatter around things that could have been considered evidence had they brought a case. It's just prejudicial to the target. And when you've reached the opposite conclusion, it doesn't make any sense to start seeding the public record with things that will just make people who are angry at Biden and want him charged all the more, although the decision has already been made. So there's policy in the way. There's mechanics in the way. Just the plain old, you're asking the Attorney General essentially to prosecute himself. And in all likelihood, he doesn't think he's done anything wrong. So that was never going to go anywhere. But because they knew it wasn't going to go anywhere, it was sort of a free vote for Republicans to register anger at Biden. So even with their razor-thin majority in the House and some Republicans on the record, not on the record, but anonymously telling reporters, yeah, this is stupid. It's not going to go anywhere, and it's not even really contempt of Congress, and it doesn't even really matter. But I think the whip operation convinced everybody they're not going to press the charges. And that'll just give us an opportunity to say, the system's rigged. Look at the Justice Department protecting their own, and nothing will come of it, and you won't have to worry about it. You'll be able to go home and tell your Republican fan base that you did the angry thing that they wanted you to do about Joe Biden, and the country won't collapse as a result because the prosecution won't go forward. So I guess that's what they did. They managed to get all their Republicans on board. They have their headline, but all the subheaders say nothing's going to come of it. So I don't know what kind of a win it was. And in the meantime, the Southern Baptists have gotten together to ban IVF. We'll get to that probably in the course of our discussion. Greg Dworkin is here waiting patiently to lead that discussion. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hey, good morning. So alternative theory here.
Yes.
Remember we said the other day that the whole reason that James Comer and Jim Jordan were trying to persecute Hunter Biden
yes,
was to get at his father, to make him upset.
Yeah, right. I remember that.
Because they're cruel. So the alternative theory here with this Robert Hur tape, they already have the transcript. They know exactly what was said. They don't need it for anything.
Not for the fact.
If they get the tape, then they can make little tiny clips of Joe Biden either stuttering or otherwise sounding like he's senile because they claim he is, and then they'd be playing that ad infinitum in ads. That's why they want it.
Yes, okay. Well,
they're not going to get it, but
you're going to have to make your own ads. Sorry. Yeah.
So no, it's got nothing to do with whether or not it goes through. This is not Steve Bannon. He's not going to jail.
No.
Because contempt.
Mm-hmm.
That's not happening.
Right.
Garland isn't. Biden, Hunter is, maybe, we'll see, but Joe is not because it's a completely separate case and has nothing to do with anything. They're just trying to be cruel.
Yeah. Well, anything that they can do, and if they can't get the guy and they can't get the kid, then they'll get somebody else who works nearby. It doesn't matter to them.
They don't care.
No.
To them it's all collateral damage. The whole point is staying in power.
Yes. Well, that was always their plan. It's always been.
It's everything. It's everything to them and nothing else. So, being the hypocrites that they are, they tried to introduce a bill that went nowhere Wednesday about reproductive rights, having already blocked a national contraception guarantee.
Yes.
Chuck Schumer then brought a bill to protect, from a national perspective, in vitro fertilization, which is extraordinarily popular even among Republicans, even among conservatives.
It makes babies.
Yeah. And they're supposedly pro-life and all this and that and everything else.
They're not more than
However,
that, pro-baby. Yes.
The largest denomination, as you mentioned, the Southern Baptists, endorsed a statement opposing in vitro fertilization, meeting in Indianapolis. It also rejected an amendment that would have booted out hundreds of churches with associate women pastors. So they did that.
Well,
including in those
who cares
churches
about
that those
people?
women only serve women and children. The denomination will maintain its official doctrinal statement that the office of pastor is only for men, but it's not going to reinforce the Constitution with language that kicks them out. Because why? I'll tell you why. Ryan Burge, who studies this, has a really fascinating look at Southern Baptists over the years.
Actual numbers.
To make a long story short, since 2019, they've baptized 921,000 members, but lost 1.8 million.
It's a waste of water.
So they're losing members twice the rate as they're gaining them.
Well, yeah, that's a business would say. We need a businessman in what's the leadership of the Southern Baptist Church called? Well, we need that.
I don't know.
We need a businessman there to.
Every
it
time
has
they
to be
put
a man.
somebody there, they get implicated in a sex scandal.
They've named more heads, twice as many, or a number of heads of the church, but twice as many of them have been convicted, I guess. That's the problem.
The IVF resolution came after a highly anticipated vote on how the denomination planned to address the ordination of women. With the rejection of this amendment, much remains the same. The denomination can't tell independent churches who to appoint as a pastor, but they have the authority to say which churches are allowed in the convention. So they exercised that last year when they kicked out 5 churches, including Saddleback, a California megachurch, for ordaining 3 women pastors. So, yes, it's the largest Protestant denomination. Yes, it's a force. However, it's shrinking.
Okay. Well, they're Protestant, and you know how we feel about protesters in this country.
Right.
So don't protest. Go back to being Catholic. I don't know what the answer to that is. But protest is right in the name, so I guess we have to tear gas you all.
So it's interesting because today, with that background,
yes,
Republicans are going to block Chuck Schumer's IVF protection bill today in the Senate.
What are
in
they,
doing
Southern
so,
Baptists?
They are being the usual hypocritical selves. All 49 Senate Republicans, they have signed on to a statement saying they support IVF. It's spearheaded by Katie Britt,
Okay,
the baby fundy voice lady.
Right.
This comes ahead of a Senate vote today on a Democratic-led bill codifying protections for IVF and assisted reproductive technology. So they're for it, except they're against it because they're going to block it. That is to say, it needs 60 votes, like most other things in the Senate, and they're not going to get 60 votes.
Well, as you know, IVF itself requires 60 votes every time somebody wants. That's the way the new process that they'd like to impose for it. The Senate will vote on every pregnancy, and to let you know whether or not you're going to get your IVF. They'll take care of it.
But that's not national. That's only in Texas.
Yes, right. I mean, it's still the same Senate.
But that's the bill that failed yesterday.
Oh, okay. Well, then Trump will withhold federal funding from states that don't submit to the same regime.
Right.
Leaving it to the states.
I'm not very good at reading these ridiculous handwritings here, but it looks like
the
U.S.
signatures.
Senate letter.
Yes.
On U.S. Senate stationery says Senate Democrats have embraced a summer of scare tactics, a partisan campaign of false fear-mongering intended to mislead and confuse the American people. In vitro fertilization is legal, available in every state across the nation. We support continued nationwide access to IVF, which has allowed millions of aspiring parents to start and grow their families. First signature, Katie Britt. Second one is Mitch McConnell. Third is John Barrasso. Looks like the fourth one here is Marsha Blackburn.
Yes. I mean, it looks like
Shelley
Herschel Walker, but he's not in there.
Capito.
Yes.
Collins, if I'm not mistaken. They're trying to get the women's
She's deeply
on top
concerned
here.
there. Right. I see that. John Barrasso snuck in there, though.
Joni Ernst is there. I just can't. Deb Fisher's there. I can't read some of these signatures, so I have no idea who they are.
Right. I mean, I don't know if that's Ted Cruz there, maybe. Above Joni Ernst. Katie Boyd Barrett looks like she has an AI-generated signature to me. John Cornyn is on the front page there.
Katie Britt.
Yeah. And then, I'm trying to see if I can
Tom
read that.
Cotton's there.
Yes. Mike
C.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out who that is.
How many Mikes
Mike
have we
Crapo.
got? Yes, right. That's it. Okay.
Well, who's underneath?
Steve Daines.
Steve Daines. It looks like Celine Daisy to me.
Yeah, right.
And I was trying to figure out what state Celine Daisy was
Dave
representing.
Staines. Something.
Probably Tennessee.
Yeah. All right. I think we got the front page there anyway. Usually
so
they
then
tried
to put all the women's there and claim that they're for it before they're against it because they think their voters are stupid, and they're probably right.
Well, in large part, this tends to be the case.
Right. So that's what's going on today politically. Not a lot, in other words, it's summer. And, the big news really is coming internationally.
Well, all right then.
There's a meeting of the G7, and just about, except for Italy, all the G7 presidents and premiers and leaders are sort of under stress and turmoil.
Not Italy?
No.
What's happening?
Meloni's pretty much
okay
in charge there. So
all right, so everyone else is under stress.
Look at France, for example. This is from France 24, an English version, telling us from France what's going on in France. So I thought I'd rely on them rather than
it could be lying.
Some blogger.
Okay. France
so
24.
French right-wing parties fracture as Macron's snap poll reshapes politics.
Oh. Well, snap polls always do.
This is just so interesting, and it would be even more interesting if it weren't for the dire implications here. French right-wing parties were mired by infighting Thursday as campaigning intensified for snap elections called by President Emmanuel Macron. But his government faces a more unified challenge from the left, who themselves are fighting over who would be the prime minister.
I see.
If they, in fact, won. Now, you may remember there's a leftist coalition, there's a rightist coalition. Macron won by claiming the center, and then he tried to raise the retirement age and screw the farmers, and everybody hates him now. So he figured in his infinite wisdom that everybody hates me, therefore it's a time to call a snap election because in reality, everybody really loves me compared to everybody else. And that's not going to work so well, but that's basically what happened there. However, if you want to know what's going on with the right-wing parties, luckily for us, we have a more domestic example to truly explain what's going on.
Okay.
That would be the Republicans in Michigan.
All right.
Yes. Remember the Republican Party in Michigan with
under sort of remember they have
Christina Caramo.
Right.
Okay. What happens is they go really super duper bonkers right wing. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, after putting up with it for a little while, the regular Republicans decide that the leader of the Michigan Republican Party is crazy.
Yeah.
That guano crazy. Okay?
Right.
And so they decide to oust her. And she says, you can't do that. It's an illegal meeting.
Right.
And so then they had to go to court to see who was really in charge, and it turns out it wasn't her.
Well,
remember that?
Womp womp. Yes.
Okay. So that's the background. Here in France.
Now there's in France.
There in France. Across the pond. Coming just 2 years after he failed to secure a majority in parliament to buttress his second presidential term, Macron's gamble on early polls risks strengthening the far-right national rally, or as they say in France, RN, Rally Nationaliste, has sparked meltdown among traditional conservatives. Eric Ciotti of the mainstream right Republican Party announced a surprise alliance with the National Rally, that is to say, Marine Le Pen, which prompted the rest of the leadership to vote him out on Wednesday.
Oh.
However, on Thursday, Ciotti insisted he was still party leader, dismissing the efforts to oust him as quibbles, little battles by mediocre people who understand nothing about what's going on.
I see, of course.
Adding it was legally void. I'm president of the party. I'm going in my office, and that's it. So he goes to the office. He locks all the doors. He doesn't let anybody in.
Well, if the ouster resolution doesn't come from the Champagne region of France,
it's not truly an ouster, right? It's got to come from the ouster region.
It's just a sparkling disarray.
It's merely a sternly worded letter unless it
Right.
comes from the
It has to be the
proper
correct
region of France.
Right. Plus, the cheese has to rot for a certain amount of time.
No, it's got to come from Provence-Alster.
See.
Calling his opponent's vote a takeover attempt, saying he had challenged its validity in court.
Sure.
Thanks to Michigan, we understand this.
Right. Michigan, thought leader for the French.
Yeah, viral images spread on social media the day before of Paris Region President Valérie Pécresse rolling up her sleeves as she approached Republicans' party headquarters as the Conservatives closed Bastiati in an apparent bid to prevent the political committee meeting from going ahead.
Sacre bleu.
So that's what's going on there. So amidst that infighting, it's hard to know exactly what's going on. The lightning election campaign with the first round of voting on June 30th, not that far off.
Well, yeah. 2 weeks.
The first round is actually coming before July 4th when the Brits have their election.
Right. That's, by the way, that's our day, and I resent it.
Yeah? June 30th?
No, July 4th.
Oh, okay.
You can't have that.
Well, don't vote for Sunak.
Yeah, I'm staying home in the British elections. Forget it.
It's also shattered the RN's smaller far-right rival, Reconquest.
Reconquest? That's the name of the party? Holy cow.
Yeah.
French.
So it's, renewal, reconquest, reevaluation.
Right. Resurrender to the
revisit.
Nazis. Sure. Terrific.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. Great.
No, there's no surrender monkey party.
No?
I'm sorry. That's just a rumor.
Okay.
Marion Maréchal, who led the list of reconquest in Sunday's European vote. Remember, the Sunday EU had their own parliament with the representatives of these countries, which gave you a flavor of how voters in those countries want to vote.
Delicious.
So Marion Maréchal, who led the list of reconquest in Sunday's European vote, called for an alliance with the RN, whose figurehead, Marine Le Pen, is her aunt. She's reached the end of the road, speaking of Marion Maréchal. She's shutting herself out of this party she's always despised. Reconquest founder Eric Zemmour said late Wednesday. Zemmour is a Le Pen rival. While smaller outfits fight amongst themselves, Le Pen's RN appears to be cruising to a massively increased parliamentary presence from its current 88 seats out of 577. People expect it'll be the largest party, but not a majority. Therefore, they'll have to make a coalition with somebody else. And the question who will work with them, and that's why the Conservatives are so upset that their leader said he'd work with them, because the rest of them said, buddy, you ain't the leader anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened there.
Wild. And a large parliamentary body there, 570 something for France.
Yeah, it sounds like the New
We're
Hampshire
stuck at 435. House. Yeah. We got some updating to do, but I don't know. If it leads you to this kind of nonsense, I don't know whether that's a great idea or not. Okay.
So Prime Minister Gabriel Attal told broadcaster France Inter Thursday, France Inter is the broadcaster, that voters stood before a societal choice. Besides the extreme left and the far right, Macron's centrist group offered a progressive, pro-work, Democratic, Republican alternative, he said. He should have, but didn't add. On the other hand, everybody hates him.
Well, I mean, all right.
So this is a hippie bashing. Attal spent much of his time attacking the left because what happened is the Socialist, Communist, Greens, and the hard left France Unbowed.
Ooh, they got some great names. I mean, I don't know if they would fly here, but I get it.
There's a smaller party, Prometheus Unchained, reestablished an alliance that broke apart over the response to Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel and the ensuing Gaza conflict.
Okay.
They put that coalition back together, so the left is united, although they're arguing about who would be the prime minister.
Yes, sure.
Okay. The France Unbowed, also known as the LFI, France Unbowed, their leader is a repeat presidential candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who lost, and also senior member of parliament, Francois Ruffin, throwing their hats in the ring. Then there's the Socialist Party, Oliver Farr, said somebody who's not the most divisive but allows us to unite the country should be prime minister, implicitly ruling out Mélenchon, who is somebody who sparks intense dislike across much of the political spectrum.
All right. Well, usually they will.
So the left is united but can't run anybody that anybody likes. Okay. The right is disunited but has the biggest party. The center cannot hold. Everybody hates Macron, so he's decided he's going to have an election. And so we'll find out June 30th what's going on. The problem in France is the way it's structured is that if the president and the coalition running the parliament are not of the same party, you can't get anything done.
If the president and the coalition, okay. Oh, the president?
The prime minister.
Oh.
That is to say, if Macron, who lost his majority in the last set of elections 2 years ago in the parliament, if they don't have the same party, then they're not united in terms of going ahead. In other words, if the parliament wants to go one way, Macron wants to go another way, it's kind of a stalemate, and that's what's been going on in France.
Okay. Well, it's all right where they can make croutons out of the stalemate.
So this is France's Macron defends decision on snap legislative elections, urges voters to defeat the far right. Mm-hmm. So he's not attacking the far left immediately. But his party did have a crushing defeat in the European parliamentary vote, insisting on Wednesday voters will ultimately choose the progressive bloc over the far right. So he's throwing an arm around the left without really embracing them while trying to stay in the center. And France is polarized enough, so I don't know that that's really going to work.
No. Okay. I really don't know what to tell you other than wait and see, and exciting party names involved in that. We could use a refresh of our party names here in this country just to keep people's interests up and keep them excited and engaged. I don't know whether it's working in France, but it's fun to parse through it. And all right, well, there's nothing else to do but wait and see. In fact, you're going to have to wait 2 more minutes to listen to us wait. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Back from France. That was exciting. All right, well, we're up to... We've been told what's happening. If we can say that brings you up to speed on what's going on in France, well, good luck to you. We'll see whether you're correct. You'll only have to wait a few days, about a little over 2 weeks to find out.
Right. So I'm reading here on Wikipedia about Reconquest. It vows to bolster the French economy in line with some observers have called a Colbertist approach.
Colbertist, like Colbert?
It's an economic and political doctrine of the 17th century created by Jean-Baptiste Colbert.
Colbert, mais oui.
Now, wait a minute. Jean-Baptiste is the guy who does the music on Colbert.
Oh.
I'm confused here.
Is this a joke?
No. The Controller General of Finances under Louis XIV of France, Colbertism is a variant of mercantilism that's sometimes seen as its synonym. It's a collection of economical practices
that doesn't sound like something you can do.
The wealth and the economy
now.
of France should serve the state, drawing on the ideas of mercantilism. He believes state intervention was needed to secure the largest part of limited resources. So basically it says it's okay for the state to intervene to do such things as, preserve the retirement age.
And that's a rightist
And that's a somewhat rightist view because they've adopted it.
All right. Yeah.
And said it is.
I mean, it's possible to do. It's just, you normally here in the United States when you hear things about, well, that's one thing. Everything is backwards.
By the state is okay.
Right.
I mean, after all, Donald Trump wants the state to intervene.
Sure.
Only on things that he wants.
There's fascist-style intervention by the state in the economy, and there's communist-style intervention by the state in the economy. If you're a fascist and you don't like what the other guys are doing, intervening, that's communism. If you're a communist and you don't like what the other guys are doing, intervening, that's fascism.
Exactly.
That's the easy way to tell.
The fact that the state intervenes doesn't make it left or right.
It's all sparkling idiocy.
Raises the idea that it matters who's in because we know what we're going to do with our power when we get it.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's okay. It's an interesting approach. It's interesting to stand there. I wouldn't have thought. I mean, that just goes to show we don't know the nuances of local politics. I would have thought, if you told me, do you think there is a party in contention for serious control in the French Parliament now in 2024 that says our platform is the Louis XIV mercantilism economic policy? Well, no, because, I think they're they're over the Louis at this point. They chopped one of their heads off. They've abandoned most of their overseas colonies. They're not in a mercantilist shipping war with the British anymore. I think that's about, say, 200 to 300 years out of date. You're right? No. Nope. No, they actually want to. Yeah. I don't know whether they have any hope of actually doing that or that's just sloganeering. Is that like, Putin telling people we want to go back to the glory days of the Soviet Union? Not really, because that would mean I'm not a billionaire anymore. But back when people feared us, and so they're like, we're going to go back to the Bourbon dynasty, back when people feared us, I guess. I don't know. Well, watch out. Back to Michigan. Detroit, watch out. If the French build a fort nearby, there's trouble brewing.
So before we get to another super stable and rational state, which is to say Israel, I'm going to throw this in by Jake Sherman with a little politics here. Apparently Trump is going to appear in front of the Business Roundtable.
Yes, well, the
Biden campaign said,
anyway.
He failed as a casino owner, filing for bankruptcy 6 times. He failed as an airline, university, and hotel owner. He failed as a steak, water, and vodka salesman. He failed at a board game and a magazine. He failed to pay his taxes. He couldn't run a lemonade stand, let alone our country. He's a fraud, a crook, and a failed businessman and a president who left America in economic ruin. So I like the idea of fraud and crook. That way you don't have to bring in convicted felon and make it political.
Right. Well, this is a business group. They're not intimidated by convicted felons.
Yeah, they don't care. It's half of them.
It's bad business. They don't like it.
Yeah, half of them are convicted. The other should be.
Is this not are you sure this isn't the business buffet table that he's appearing before? I'm not certain.
Business Roundtable, Association of CEOs of leading U.S. companies.
You say so. Yeah. Right. Well, like a Chamber of Commerce offshoot, more conservative, the Business Roundtable.
Yeah. So the real Martina Navratilova saw that and chimed in.
Oh.
Said, Trump also failed in Aspen real estate, which is actually hard.
Oh, yes. Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, really, honestly, losing money in a casino is
It's difficult,
the most crystalline.
The house always wins except if Trump is the house.
Right. And I sold the house. And another thing, it was worth $1 trillion. I sold it for 50 cents. But okay, well, he's in Washington today. I guess that was one of his first trips back to the Capitol Hill area since he tried to sack it. Yes. Yeah,
Trump is going to talk to GOP senators who can't stand him and pretend that they all get along.
Yeah, well, nice. They'll have some photo ops. But he's there to lay out his agenda for the term he hasn't
he's there
won
to
and thank God won't. But yeah.
I mean, it's the only reason he's there.
When I seize power, whether I win the election or not, I'm going to need you to do the following things, or else.
Otherwise, you're going to go to jail with me.
Right, right.
And I'll make sure.
Yes, and we'll do it all official and give you a sparkling execution from the beheaded region. Well, so yeah, he's there to muscle them in on the Project 2025 stuff. Many of them on board conceptually with that anyway, even if they want to distance themselves from Trump. Right. But they can't manifest that.
So this is the first time I've seen this, and therefore it's worth mentioning.
All right.
Andrew Solander, who is a reporter for Axios. Mm-hmm. The Capitol Hill Club today, where Trump is scheduled to address House Republicans.
The other buffet table.
Is a confluence of both anti-Trump and pro-Palestinian protesters. It's the first time I've seen pro-Palestinian protesters at a Republican event.
Ah, you've been waiting for that for a long time.
Yeah, here it is. So
That's
I want to acknowledge that it apparently is happening.
Yes, good. All right. Yeah, you had an eye out for that, and once you saw it, you called it just as... Okay, good. Well, it's happening. There's an event today. Take advantage of it. Want to raise awareness, I mean, they're not very receptive ears, but that's fine. Yell at them. Good. All right.
Right. As the Republicans walk in, protesters are yelling at them, "Have you no dignity? Don't drink the Kool-Aid. You're a bootlicker."
Okay. But that's which protesters are those? Not the Palestinian
Those are
ones?
the anti-Trump protesters.
Okay. And then the pro-Palestinian one said something like that probably also, but also said genocide in the middle. All right. I mean, good. I'm glad they have a presence there. They should. They are, especially if it's going to have the Senate Republican conference there. Again, not receptive ears, and we'll see whether they ever do this again. But I mean, what have they ever had a protest and had the people being protested come out and say, you know what, you're right? No. Never. So what the hell? You might as well start protesting Republicans too. Keep Greg happy, as far as I'm concerned. It can be the only reason if you want it to be. All right. So meeting in Capitol Hill for Trump. I guess now that his trial is over and he's awaiting sentencing, he's allowed to travel to. See, why they didn't put an ankle monitor on him immediately? And I think he may actually had to have surrendered his passport though.
Right. And there's new economic news today.
Oh, more? I thought we were done with the
energy prices unchanged. Expected to be up by 0.3%, but they're unchanged.
Unchanged. That's the news. The news is nothing happened.
Producer prices fall.
Producer price. Okay. Cost less for them to produce the oil so that if the price is unchanged, they're still making more money.
Yes. Well, that's food and energy. Producers of all sorts, actually, stuff fell. So inflation, in other words, is getting under control.
Well,
which is good. It needs to happen 6 months before the election, and that's about now.
Look at that. Yeah. Okay. Good. We'll take it. That's good. That's straight ahead. All the good news is sort of been presented oddly, like the one-off, very Washington way of doing it. Yesterday we were talking about... what was it? It was that the increase in the rate of inflation in these various sectors was the lowest increase, the smallest increase since some number of years prior. It was a very Washington way of saying, all right, it was an increase, yes, but a very low one. So that's good, as opposed to, I don't know what, decreases in consumer prices, which, look, it's not going to happen.
Right. John Harwood is looking at the overall big picture, the 50,000-foot view, and says, why has the GOP embraced authoritarianism? Well, they keep losing. Losing 7 of 8 presidential popular votes makes democracy seem threatening.
Oh, I see. All right, yeah.
Christian right admires strongmen, and they like a crackdown on cultural change they can't stop. See IVF, see Southern Baptist.
All right.
Okay.
That seems right.
And the third reason out of 3 is Trump is in Putin's pocket.
Oh. And he's an authoritarian, so they might as well be authoritarians too? Is that it?
Right. So, to me, that's something you run on, but we'll see.
I mean, to me, no. You don't run on that. But they love authoritarianism. If they love it enough, I guess you can run on it. I mean, it should, by rights, keep you permanently at best in the mid-40s, and that's kind of what's been happening.
Right.
And then you lose that personality one day, and then it's just authoritarianism for authoritarianism's sake, and any one of these idiots could be the leader. That's not so attractive. We'll see. The sooner we find out what happens after Trump is gone, the better.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so in the meantime, over in merry old England, Rishi Sunak continues to labor, which is to say he's getting clobbered by Labour.
Clobered, C-L-O-U.
Clobbered.
Yeah, right. They put a U in everything. There's no, in England, you are in the middle of everything. There you are. It's very welcoming. Yes. All right. So Rishi Sunak also in trouble, and they chose short-term elections too. So late June, early July, a tumultuous time for Western Europe.
Right. So when the parties in England issue policy, they label it a manifesto. I don't know why, but they do.
Like the Unabomber.
So Keir Starmer and the Labour Party today launched a manifesto that's good enough to win this election, says the Conservative Spectator, and presented it in a commensurate manner. If it comes across as damning with faint praise, then that's what your author intended. After all, there's no new policy, no discernible retail offer for voters. There was some heckling when he did this, and Starmer said, well, we've stopped being the party of protest. We left that a long time ago. So he's claiming the middle and moving center from the Jeremy Corbyn era.
I see.
If people don't like it, they can vote Lib Dem.
All right.
They don't have to vote conservative, but nobody's going to vote conservative, which is to say Tory, same party.
Yeah. They have, that's their thing, I guess, is, are they the only party that has, we have like 2-3 different names. Like GOP and Republican.
Yeah. Exactly.
Just everybody has nicknames. What's the nickname of the Reconquest Party? Do we know? Nazi, possibly?
I don't know.
No?
Labour's event managers also got some members of the public in at the start to do the human stuff Starmer struggles with, including a man whose NHS cancer treatment delays have left him terminally ill. That packed far more impressive emotional punch than Sunak did. He wheeled in somebody named Gillian Keegan to talk about growing up working class. Nobody knows why. So we can award 6 out of 10 to Starmer. No trouble at the mill. Any Tory spin doctors looking for material to which to set off a stampede of nervous voters are going to be disappointed because Starmer's not giving you anything to work with.
All right, interesting. I thought that was an interesting way of putting it. We brought in somebody to help out with, being human, which is a struggle for him.
That's what the governor of Florida does.
That's true.
He brings his wife in whenever he wants to show somebody who's actually human, because he's not, but
he's
she is.
He's a Smurf, so it's a humanoid life form, Smurf. But they're not good at it. It's amazing that you can rise in politics without having any human touch whatsoever.
So the last topic, just worthy of mention again with a 50,000 foot view. This is from a magazine called Plus 972. It's actually both Israeli and Palestinian independent journalists writing here.
Okay.
And this is by Meron Rappaport, and writes, what Benny Gantz's exit reveals about Israel's failed Gaza strategy. October 7th collapsed Israel's decades-old separation policy, quote-unquote, toward Gaza. Benny Gantz and Gallant, who's the defense minister, know it, center-right Gallant. Netanyahu and the far right still won't admit it. In other words, what Israel's policy had been is to say Gaza has nothing to do with the West Bank. They're completely separate independent nations, sort of. Protectorates, whatever you want to call it. But they have nothing to do with each other. The West Bank is run by the Palestinian Authority, and these rogue Hamas people run Gaza, and it's not the same country, and you can't have one entity that we negotiate with. We have to split them apart because they're completely separate. And it's an illusion, and it just fell apart. So on the face of it, he writes, It's hard to make sense of the rift within Israeli government over the day after in Gaza, which led Benny Gantz to quit the coalition. In a press conference announcing his decision, Gantz accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu, of preventing real victory by failing to present a viable plan. But Gantz doesn't have one either. And the same could be said to Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who was Gantz's closest ally in the war cabinet. Gallant reportedly walked out of a security cabinet meeting last month when other ministers castigated him for demanding Netanyahu rule out prolonged Israel's civilian or military control. But the defense minister's alternative proposal is essentially the same as Gantz's. Establish a government run by non-Hamas Palestinian entities. Which no Palestinian, Arab, or international actor will accept. It's true that Gantz and Gallant have also demanded Netanyahu prioritize a deal with Hamas, bring back the hostages, but this apparent disagreement also collapses under scrutiny. Any deal would entail a significant, if not complete, Israeli withdrawal, and a months-long, if not permanent, ceasefire. Such a scenario would result in one of two possibilities: either return to Hamas rule or the reimposition of the Palestinian Authority, both of which are unacceptable to Gantz, Gallant, and Netanyahu and everybody else in Israel. Why does the Israeli right see the fundamentally incoherent proposal as an existential threat? The answer goes far deeper than disagreements over the day after and who runs the place. What Gantz and Gallant are implicitly acknowledging, and Netanyahu and his allies refuse to admit, is that this separation policy has collapsed. No longer able to maintain the illusion that the Gaza Strip has been severed from the West Bank, and thus from any future Palestinian political settlement, Israel's leaders are in a bind. And this policy goes back to the 90s. Most Israelis thought Israel had left Gaza, therefore no longer bore any responsibility for what happened there. When Netanyahu returned to the premiership in 2009, he worked to entrench this separation policy. He expanded the rift between Gaza and the West Bank by channeling funds to Hamas, who were at the time fighting Palestinian Authority.
Yes.
And this in turn has paved the way for Israel to annex part or even all of the West Bank. That was the strategy. And Gaza said, we're not separate from the West Bank. Because there affects us, we want to run everything, essentially.
Well, everyone always thinks they want to run everything.
So one of Hamas's stated reasons for October 7th was to shatter the illusion that Gaza is a separate entity and to return the Strip and the entire Palestinian cause back to history. And in this, it's undoubtedly succeeded. However, even after October 7th, Israel's largely continued to ignore the connection between Gaza and the West Bank. In addition to utter brutality, Israel's current assault on Gaza differs in important ways from previous wars. Never before has Israel allowed a territory under its military control to go essentially ungoverned. And this stands in stark contrast to the current operation when, for example, it occupied southern Lebanon. Despite the fact that Israel effectively controls Gaza, Israel treats Gaza's 2.3 million residents as though they're living in a vacuum. So as long as that power vacuum in Gaza exists, the right can achieve whatever it wants, the war can continue, Netanyahu can stay in office, but nothing's going to actually happen. The messianic nationalist right wants to maintain this limbo because it opens the door to the possibility of voluntary migration. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the nutcases in the cabinet, want Israelis to migrate to Gaza, take it over, and essentially kick the Palestinians out somewhere, preferably Egypt, but they don't really care.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No,
and
it
that's
doesn't
why
have
it's
to
failing, because that's their strategy, and the strategy makes no sense.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to make any sense, but it can't be understood or comprehended, I don't think, here in the United States unless you remind everybody. When they say messianic, I mean, they mean true religious messianic. It doesn't make any sense. Where will they go? How can you affect this thing? I don't know. God will do it. Oh.
Yeah.
Well.
And then a miracle occurred.
Yeah, right. Poof. And then, also we don't care. Yeah. It's lawless in every sense of the word. And then just saying, I don't really know what comes of it. I don't know what happens. I don't know what happens to those people. I don't know. I don't know if it doesn't matter. There might not even be an earth even anymore at the end of it, if you believe the Christian version of this dominionist theory. So I don't know. But the point is, right here, right now, I want to take this piece of land and I want to kill whoever wants to take it from me. That's it. That's the bottom line. I mean, oof. We've dealt with this before in the past. This is an ancient sort of approach to, I don't know what, polity, I guess. But, I mean, just plain old conquest. Vikings, the old filibuster freebooter type weirdos from the post-war American South looking for new places to colonize and reimpose slavery. I'll just go take it, and I'll stay there until I run out of ammunition. That's it. Well, and these guys have, seats in the parliament and in the government, and this is who Netanyahu has to agree to work with in order to stay in power and not be prosecuted for the corruption charges he's facing. Sure, yes, God will fix everything. And then when he doesn't, I don't know. We'll see. That's depressing.
So, yeah,
have a good
but
weekend.
It's also realistic. I mean,
yeah.
it's
that's
not
the
like
real
anybody
description
should
of what
expect
they're up
something
to.
really good to happen. Now, given that this is going on, it makes perfect sense that Hamas doesn't want a deal.
True.
They think they're winning.
And you should also be reminded that if everybody sat down right at the table, on the one hand, you'd have on the one side the people we just described to you, and sitting on the other side of the table, of course, are people who are like, well, if I blow those people up while I'm wearing this green headband, I go directly to heaven, and there's 72 virgins for me, or what have you. Well, I don't know how much headway we're going to make here today, guys. What do you guys think for lunch? Falafel, yes. Is that a good compromise? What do you do with it? How will they? And literally all they can agree on is, well, I'm out of ammunition, you're out of ammunition. Let's have a ceasefire until we can get more ammunition. That's it. That's the negotiation.
So, tough times.
Yeah.
Economy's getting better. Middle East continues to seem intractable. Despite Biden's best efforts, because there's only so much you can do, and
in the face
two sides
of this,
really want to kill each other.
Right.
And meanwhile, in Europe, France is doing its best to emulate Michigan GOP, which is not good.
No.
None of that's good.
Well,
except for the inflation stuff at home.
Russia, I guess, likes it.
So we're in better shape than other people, and we're not in great shape.
Right. True. Well, we'll hold on to what we've got and see how long we can keep the charade up and do the normalcy dance and see who's into it. Wow. All right. Heading into the summer. So, yeah, we'll just wait and see. Let's see. I don't know, anything lighthearted like a new flag at the Alito house or anything like that?
Right side up or upside down? Not sure. I think that...
that was like relief.
What's her name? Martha Mitchell, whoever the wife is there.
Martha Karen
is working on design.
I guess so. Yeah, right. She did announce on tape that she had some ideas about flags she was going to fly. She is a strong believer in the power of flags. I really never really understood that exactly, but it never made any sense, of course, flying the flag upside down. The explanation they gave for it, I mean, which just leads you to believe, oh, no, it was to signal support for the insurrection. The neighbors never even saw it, and even if they did, I'm not certain why they would think. That's obviously an answer to our F Trump sign.
Okay, and as we leave, I leave, today's Thursday.
Right.
10 o'clock is right around the corner.
True.
Might get some Supreme Court opinions released today, and we might get some tomorrow.
All right. Well, that's news. I guess, I mean,
It'll
won't be able to...
It'll be bad news because it's a bad Supreme Court, but we'll see what happens.
True. Yeah, so, all right. Well, if you happen to be watching and they release something exciting and you feel like sending a Skype note, I can pass that on. But in the meantime, one more hour of pretending there's nothing coming from the Supreme Court today.
Yeah, it usually takes about 20, 25 minutes for them to actually get around to releasing things.
Okay. Yeah. So they spend a couple of minutes. They're stapling in between 10 o'clock and 10:20. And then, of course, at 10 20, they release something. At 10:21, CNN reporters tell you the opposite of what it is and what it means. And then by about 11 o'clock, everybody realizes they got it backwards and they fix it. All right, so that we can perhaps discuss. Maybe it'll be in the news and analyzed in time for tomorrow's show.
Maybe. Anyway, take care, and
Very
I'll
good.
talk to you on Monday.
Thank you. You do this. Take care and have a good weekend, and we'll catch up with you then. I don't know. Try and keep it together. All right, let's see. I have a couple of things that I can waste a few minutes on before our break, obviously. Let me read through Politico's morning report, just because I only have a couple of minutes, about what's going on with Trump's visit back to the scene of the crime. You know how criminals always return to the scene of the crime. He's going back to Capitol Hill. According to those folks at Politico, Rachel Bade, Eugene Daniels, and Ryan Lizza, who report what's going on here in their sort of playbook, and it is actually what they call the playbook. Let's see. And that, of course, that covers all sorts of things. So I got to skip a couple of the dopey things. One of the semi-dopey things that tends to get reported all the time. The congressional baseball game was held yesterday, I guess. And, no one cares about that, whatever. It only gets exciting when people start shooting one another at the practices. That's the last time anybody heard anything exciting about the congressional baseball game. And of course, that was horrific. So, we were looking for some sort of more positive excitement. Doesn't happen. It's not an interesting game. As it happens, the Republicans won. They had a football game score baseball game, 31-11. Described as a slow-paced, high-error game. It's the fourth straight Republican win, and I guess if there's anything to be taken from it at all, there were some protests there. They held the game at Nationals Park. So, centralized location, downtown D.C., people jumped out and protested. They were protesting against the continued use of fossil fuels, in case you were wondering what kind of protesters they were. And otherwise of note, spotted in the stands, Representative Lauren Boebert, wearing an autographed MAGA hat and vaping during the game, which is apparently in contravention to Nationals Park smoking policy. But she's done worse things in the crowd at spectator events in recent memory. So I think it was probably still daytime, and she would have been caught if she had been, let's say, repeating her Beetlejuice performance. So just straight up vaping just to show how independent and cool she is. Then again, more reporting on Trump visiting the Hill and making various demands. Perhaps we'll run through what he was expected to say to the Republicans when he gets there, just to keep you up to date on how worried you should be about how authoritarian his so-called policy agenda is. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what's going on. Here's the Politico Playbook Roundup I promised you before the break of what Trump is doing or is expected to do while he is wasting his time back at the scene of the crime where he last was. He's been in D.C., I think, in between for various court hearings, etc. But back on Capitol Hill, where he never actually made it to Capitol Hill on January 6th, but was ensconced at the White House watching the riot on television and hoping to sack the Capitol permanently. And now he's back. Here's what's going on. Trump will make his, as they say in Politico, his first visit to the Hill since leaving the presidency and since the violence of January 6th. Addressing House Republicans at the Capitol Hill Club before meeting with Senate Republicans over at NRSC headquarters, that right nearby. The agenda, we're told, say the Politico reporters, will be resolutely forward-looking. So that's very, statesman-like sounding. I mean, the other way of saying it, as Greg says, without getting bleeped, is bat guano crazy. But Politico says it's resolutely forward-looking. A potential 2025 legislative agenda will be the central focus, with tax policy, foreign relations, and entitlements all teed up for discussion. Which, again, using language that makes it sound like they're setting a policy agenda Whereas if you describe what's actually happening, more tax cuts for the rich and impoverishment to the federal treasury, endorsement of Christian dominionism in the Middle East, knuckling under to Putin and surrendering Ukraine and the rest of Western Europe to Russian interests, and slashing Social Security, all up for discussion. Well, or as they put it, tax policy, foreign relations, and entitlements. That's the plan, anyway, which is probably as close as they come to a good reminder that the person we're talking about leading this party, who's coming to, give his leadership pep talk today, is flat insane and authoritarian and all the bad things that go along with it, but also an idiot and insane. So that's the plan. So when the Republicans try to dress up what he's doing, well, we're going to have a resolutely forward-looking discussion of tax policy, foreign relations, and entitlements. The reality, they admit, is that Trump, true to nature, has been obsessed in recent weeks with harnessing the powers of Congress to fight on his own behalf and go to war against the Democrats he accuses of weaponizing the justice system against him. It's a campaign he's orchestrated in the days after his May 31st conviction on 34 felony counts in New York, starting with a phone call that he made to the man he wanted to lead it. That is, of course, Speaker Mike Johnson. So super inappropriate that the candidate for the presidency, who's just been convicted on 34 criminal counts, has that kind of access that he can call the Speaker of the House and the Speaker will take his call. Like, that can happen. You can always place the phone call, but usually the Speaker will be like 34 felony convictions. Tell him I'm in the bathroom. Anything. I can't take this call. But instead, he does take the call. And what was the call about? Now, we're going to press forward with a resolutely forward-looking policy on taxation, foreign policy, and entitlements. No. Trump was still angry when he made the call, according to those who have heard accounts of it from Johnson. And that's not even to address the substance of it, dropping frequent F-bombs as he spoke with the soft-spoken and pious GOP leader. You remember, he's super religious. So lots of F-bombs. That's the way to get him on board. And what's the discussion all about? Is it about tax policy, foreign relations, and entitlements? No. We have to overturn this, Trump insisted. And this is the nightmare scenario for a normal speaker. Please don't put him through to me. He's going to, if it was a normal politician, he'll broach things in terms of, well, let's talk tax policy, foreign relations, and entitlements, but P.S., I need your help on this thing. But Trump is going to make this the overt focus of the discussion. I want you to use Congress to pass a law that says that I don't have to be convicted anymore. The 34 convictions should be thrown out. There should be no more charges against me. I don't want to be found guilty of crimes. And I won't be if Congress outlaws charging Donald Trump with crimes. So I want you to do that. Overturn it. There's not normally a part of the process. It's a totally different branch. You get convicted, you can appeal the conviction, but that all happens in the judicial branch. Normally, you don't go to the legislative branch and say, I want you to make it illegal to do anything about convicting me. Meanwhile, Johnson apparently sympathizes with Trump's frustration. He'd been among the first batch of Republican lawmakers to appear alongside Trump at the Manhattan trial. He's been harping on DA Alvin Bragg's case and the alleged broader abuse of the justice system since before he took the gavel. The speaker didn't really need to be convinced, which is amazing. One person familiar with the conversation said Johnson, a former attorney himself, already believed the House had a role to play in addressing Trump's predicament. It does not. But the Speaker of the House does believe now, for some reason, that they do have a role to play. And why not? Isn't that just as crazy as what's happening on the Israeli right? God says we should be doing this. I don't really know how we work this whole thing out where we've managed to maintain a democracy here in the United States with the separation of powers. And I'm going to do away with that. Isn't that a problem? Maybe, but God will make it right. I don't know. Well, anyway, he believes that, yes, they do have a role in addressing Trump's predicament. The two have spoken since on the subject multiple times. But sympathy can only go so far. With a slim majority and skittish swing district members, Johnson is already finding it difficult to deliver for Trump. Republicans have all but abandoned their effort to impeach President Joe Biden, for instance, as Trump wants and still wants them to do. Yesterday's contempt vote against AG Merrick Garland squeaked by only after an intense whipping effort, and now a series of proposals targeting what Republicans call rogue prosecutors, i.e. those investigating Trump, it actually says it right here in print, appear to have a wobbly future. House GOP leaders, for instance, spent yesterday afternoon whipping a bill written by Representative Russell Fry of South Carolina that would allow presidents charged at the state level, i.e. Trump, to move those cases to federal court. Now, it says here, effectively nullifying the power of officials like Bragg and Fulton County DA Fani Willis. I'm not sure that it does that. More on that in a second. The bill was filed in April of 2023 and reported by the Judiciary Committee in last September. Okay, that's what it says. Only now is it being readied for possible floor action. I guess to a limited extent it would nullify some of the power of, the power of officials like Bragg and Fani Willis is that they can decide to indict people under state law in their jurisdictions. And that can still happen. And the idea of moving the case to federal court, I've seen this misinterpreted a couple of times in a couple of different ways. For instance, there was an initial reaction to it like, oh, what if you move the case to federal court? And there's a whole doctrine and a whole body of law that governs how you do that. But yes, you can remove a case from state court to federal court under certain circumstances. And a lot of it discussed right in the Constitution, but also since promulgated rules and the jurisprudence around those rules. But basically, if a case would otherwise qualify, there are certain types of cases that qualify for federal jurisdiction, cases in which they have, what do they call it, diversity jurisdiction, right? There's residents of different states and who are suing one another, and does it reach the threshold? There's something in the Constitution back in the day when when horses were money or whatever, right? You had to reach a threshold. There had to be an amount in controversy over $20, and the threshold has gone up since then. But large financial interest, diversity of residency, so that if a resident of Connecticut is suing a resident of, well, they didn't have it in Arizona at the time, but let's even keep it Eastern Seaboard, resident of Connecticut suing a resident of Delaware, for whatever reason. And the founders were worried about if you sue them and you file suit in Connecticut, the plaintiff files suit, and you have to haul a defendant up from Delaware to do it, won't the Delaware defendant be at a disadvantage in the home court, essentially, of the resident of Connecticut? Well, we can solve that by having it tried in federal court. Of course, it's federal court, in all likelihood, it's federal court in Connecticut. If there's, a transgression alleged here, if it took place in Connecticut, Connecticut is the place with jurisdiction. It'll still be tried in Connecticut, physically in Connecticut, but it can be tried in federal court. So that's the mechanism they're looking to use. Why should you be subject to the whims of the law as interpreted by mere state officials when you could be subject to the law as interpreted by mere federal officials instead? So the location of the trial won't change much. It'll move to a different courthouse. But if you remove every case that's filed against former presidents in this case, to federal court, it would still be in New York in federal court that they tried him. It would still be in Georgia in the case of the Fulton County case. It just would be in federal court. And I guess what the Republicans would be interested in as well, if at a minimum, the case would be tried then by federal judges, some of whom have been appointed by Donald Trump, or at least by Republicans, that makes us think that those judges will be, unfair in our favor, is what they're looking for. Does it limit or nullify the power of officials like Bragg and Willis? Not so much. I mean, the charges are the same. And by the way, when you remove a case brought in state court under state law to federal court, it simply changes the venue of the trial and nothing else. The charges remain state charges, and they're very often tried by state officials under federal rules and before a federal judge. But it's basically as if the same trial was being held across the street in the state courthouse or the county courthouse. And then they just have it in the federal courthouse. Occasionally, some differences in the rules of practice, the rules of evidence, etc. But they're rules that most of the prosecutors are pretty familiar with anyway. So it doesn't change a great deal. Doesn't remove their ability to charge people. It doesn't change the body of law under which they're charged. There was some speculation early on that, if you move these cases to federal court, then they could be pardoned. That Trump could pardon himself because now he's facing federal charges and he can pardon himself on those. And that's not the case, or it's not believed to be the case with state charges, except that's not true. Those are still state charges. They're just being tried in front of a federal judge. There's nothing that suggests that the pardon power applies. But, then again, who cares about rules, right? So there's always that. But as long as you're not caring about rules, why bother transferring the cases at all? Why not just simply claim presidential power to pardon state offenses and say, who's going to oppose me on this? And if I can get the Supreme Court to rule in my favor, then you were all wrong. So you could try that. But, along the way, we'll parse statements like this, nullifying the power of officials like Bragg and Fani Willis, who would, in all likelihood, one, still be prosecuting the state law charges just under the federal rules of evidence in front of a federal judge, who may or may not be a Trump appointee. That could cause a problem, certainly. Maybe even a George W. Bush appointee would cause a problem. I don't know. But in addition, they could show and prosecute the cases themselves, or whoever they were planning on sending to the county courthouse to prosecute those cases can just as easily prosecute those cases in federal court as a matter of routine. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of strange misinterpretation of the actual effect, and that may also stem from, I wouldn't be surprised if people like Russell Fry are out there selling it this way. Well, I'm going to sponsor this bill to move these cases to federal court because then the president can pardon himself. No, that's wrong. Oh, what? It is? That is wrong? Oh, well, then I have another bill saying that I'm not wrong. Let's extend the pardon power to state charges. Well, that would probably require a constitutional amendment. All right, well, then I'll just sponsor one of those. And if it doesn't get ratified, then just do the damn thing and just say you're pardoned and see who fights you on it. But it may very well be the case that the sponsors don't actually have an accurate idea of what the bill can and can't do. That happens a lot. And it'll probably happen a lot when you're the kind of person who would sponsor a bill like this. So let's just keep that in mind. Now, let's finish up this piece here. I didn't realize that we were going to end up having to analyze some portion of this so thoroughly. Johnson, remember him? He's the Speaker of the House, has also been in talks with the Judiciary Chair and Trump ally, Jim Jordan, about using the appropriations process to target Special Counsel Jack Smith's probe. Interesting note, Johnson been in talks with Jim Jordan about the appropriations process. Which one of those two guys is on the Appropriations Committee? Answer, neither. But does the Appropriations Committee sometimes take its instruction from the committee with authorizing, authority, I guess. Yes, sometimes. And remember, we have the two-step budget process, but this Republican conference is so enthralled to the personalities that it's not far-fetched to believe that if both the Speaker and Jim Jordan of the Judiciary Committee say we would like to see cuts to the DOJ budget, that would mean that the Judiciary Committee would report out an authorizing bill for the DOJ and say zero out or lessen the amount of money that was authorized for expenditure for the Justice Department. And then the Appropriations Subcommittee with jurisdiction over the DOJ's appropriations bill might then say, all right, well, with less money authorized, we will appropriate less in addition and fulfill their wishes that way. But it's a couple steps removed. Anyway, Jordan and Johnson talking about using this appropriations process to target Smith. It's an apparent softening of Johnson's, I guess, position on this. And here's an interesting thing, another good, interesting measure on one of the biggest and most idiotic names in Congress. The Speaker told Politico, they say, in an interview last month that he found a similar idea by murdery trader Green, that is to use the appropriations process to target Jack Smith, unworkable. Now he's actually looking into it, which might really just literally be a signal of, I don't like, trust, or believe, or want to credit in any way murdery trader Green, and instead anything she suggests is idiotic and I don't want to hear about it. But this one, Jim Jordan is talking about. Oh, well then it's the same idea. But I like him better. Okay. Maybe. Okay, let's see. The country certainly sees what's going on, says, I guess, Jordan. And they don't want Fani Willis or Alvin Bragg and these kinds of folks to be able to continue to use grant dollars for targeting people in a political lawfare type of way. Jordan told us. Now, grant dollars. I mean, that's federal money or federal grants. I don't see. I mean, maybe that's how they're planning on targeting him through the appropriations. No federal DOJ program grants for jurisdictions that do, I don't know, whatever, things that we don't like. And as opposed to how do you defund? Remember that the topic was defunding Jack Smith. So can we have your comment on defunding Jack Smith? Yes, my comment is Fani Willis, Alvin Bragg. Yeah, but what about Jack Smith? Fani Willis, Alvin Bragg. It may just be that, again, people don't know what they're talking about, or they may just be conflating two efforts. One, we can cut the budget of the DOJ itself to deal with the Jack Smith threat. And how do we use the budget to get at the Alvin Bragg, Fani Willis game? Well, the DOJ almost certainly is making some sort of crime-fighting, justice-promoting grants to the jurisdictions of, let's say, New York City and Atlanta, Georgia. Why don't we cut those grants and say, that's Alvin Bragg's fault. That's Fani Willis's fault. Of course, it will be real interesting to find the Trump administration and the Republican Congress saying, yeah, let's cut the grants that New York City uses to pay its cops to punish Alvin Bragg, which could happen in that the cops will then go out and protest Alvin Bragg. But in the meantime, then they're not getting money. I don't know. That's a real interesting predicament. But as Republicans vote against their own economic interests all the time, I don't know that it would affect the outcome of the cop vote in New York State as being pro-Trump, even though Trump would be directly taking money out of their pockets and saying it's Alvin Bragg that's doing it. No, it's actually you doing it. But I want you to blame Alvin Bragg. Okay, well then we'll do that. Well, anyway, Let's see. Where were we with this? Right. The country sees what's going on. They don't want Fonnie Willis and Alvin Bragg and all these kinds of folks able to use grant dollars for targeting people in a political lawfare type of way. We want them to use that grant money to target people I hate in a political lawfare type of way. The problem, of course, is that these proposals don't yet have the votes to pass, thank God, and hopefully they never will. One senior appropriator, Mike Simpson of Idaho, told Playbook the idea of defunding Smith was, quote, stupid. I don't think it's a good idea unless you can show that the prosecutors acted in bad faith or fraud or something like that, he said. They're just doing their job, even though I disagree with what they did. That's some pretty old school thinking. We accuse Democrats of weaponizing the justice system, said another skeptical senior Republican who was granted anonymity to speak with fear of MAGA blowback. That's the way they put it. It's really because of MAGA blowback. And that's exactly what we'd be doing. Yes, that's correct. Welcome to the game. We accuse the Democrats of weaponizing the justice system, but we would be doing that. And we already have. But we would be doing it if we did more of this stuff. Johnson's leadership team isn't giving up just yet. Off the House floor yesterday, Fry, who said he's not spoken to Trump about his proposal, said there's an education effort underway inside the House GOP. His argument, federal lawmakers, executive officials, and judges currently have the ability to try to move their local cases to federal court. Why shouldn't the leader of the free world? Well, he isn't one right now. He's the former president. One difference, of course, is that unlike those federal officials, Trump isn't currently in office. What's more, he argued, federal jury selection is more robust and includes more disclosure. In my experience so far, the more House members have heard about it, the more comfortable they are with it, he said. It's not a unique concept. All right, that's true. I mean, it does happen for other federal officials. Of course, Trump isn't a federal official, which all he's trying to do is to say, well, former presidents should be able to consider themselves federal officials forever whenever they're charged with crimes, I guess. Which is something more of an admission probably of Republican malfeasance than he wanted it to be. But I also don't think it makes a huge substantive difference. There are small differences at the margins. Maybe, again, as he says, more disclosure in jury selection, voir dire, and maybe more restrictive federal rules of evidence in some cases. But essentially, it doesn't get you. It's not going to be enough for Trump. Trump is going to think this is weak sauce. I want you to actually adopt a bill that says I'm not convicted and I can't be charged anymore. That's what I'm looking for. Can they deliver that? Look, they can write anything they want on a piece of paper, and it doesn't matter even if it's unconstitutional until the majority of the Supreme Court says, yes, it's unconstitutional and we're going to do something to stop it. Until that happens, they can kind of try anything they want. All right, third break coming up. What can we use to fill time in between now and then? We got to get to this story at some point. A top headline of the day. All right, but we'll save it for the other side here. And instead, perhaps we could read a little something about the Garland contempt citation. We'll see how Steve Bannon treated it over at MSNBC's Maddow blog. In an unfortunate stunt, Republicans hold AG Garland in contempt. It was obvious that the House Republicans planned to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt as part of a partisan stunt, but they went ahead and did it anyway. Everyone knew what they were doing, and they just went ahead and did it. As the Republican Party's broader offensive against the Justice Department and federal law enforcement intensifies, back the blue, Attorney General Merrick Garland wrote a Washington Post op-ed this week, I know, we read it, calling on some partisan restraint, calling for some anyway. Disagreements about politics are good for our democracy. We read this. They are normal, but using conspiracy theories, falsehoods, and violence and threats of violence to affect political outcomes, not normal. The short-term political benefits of those tactics will never make up for the long-term cost to our country. But of course, Most Republicans figure they'll be dead by the time those bills come due. Anyway, one day later, the House Republicans responded, voting to hold the Attorney General in contempt. The final tally on the floor, 216 to 207. 7 Democrats did not vote, although the measure would have passed anyway. The outcome was hardly a foregone conclusion. As recently as late yesterday, that would have been late Tuesday, Axios reported that the contempt resolution was hanging by a thread and in severe danger of being pulled by the GOP leadership. As recently as yesterday morning, Politico reported that there was lingering skepticism within corners of the House Republican Conference, given the party's tiny majority in the chamber and the unanimous opposition of Democratic lawmakers. The resolution would have failed if only a few GOP members had balked. They didn't, though. Ultimately, only one House Republican, Ohio's Dave Joyce, a former prosecutor, opposed the measure. In terms of how we arrived at this point, it was early last year when President Joe Biden and his team made an unexpected announcement. The Delaware Democrat, after leaving the vice presidency, inadvertently took some classified documents with him. You know what underlay all of this. We explained it earlier. Soon after Robert Hur was appointed, he had an interview. They taped the interview. And then finally, the refusal to release the tapes of those interviews. By the way, it is noted in here, Donald Trump, in contrast, refused to be interviewed by either Special Counsel Robert Mueller or Jack Smith. That's odd. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The Supreme Court decisions are starting to filter out. We can make a brief stop on one of those. I thought I would continue, though, with reading Steve Bannon's article about the vote to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress, just so we could get back around to some of the mechanics of why it won't work and help fill in the background here, some of this stuff. Let's see. We have, well, first of all, Steve Bannon makes a little detour to point out just how much of this is political gamesmanship. Let's see. Officials realize that Republicans are simply looking for a political toy that they can play with ahead of Election Day 2024. Former Republican Representative Ken Buck admitted as much last month, explaining that Congress already has the transcript and the relevant information, adding that his former GOP colleagues are just looking for something for political purposes. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer went even further to prove Dems right, declaring in a recent fundraising appeal that he wanted the recordings as part of an effort to target swing voters across the country. Why would you say such a thing? You're very dumb. If there was any question as to whether or not the House Republicans were engaged in a partisan election year stunt, Comer appeared to answer it. As for what happens now, the mechanics, the answer is not much. Given that there's no legitimate or legislative reason to release the audio, Team Biden asserted executive privilege. White House counsel Ed Siskel told congressional Republicans in a letter last month, the absence of a legitimate need for the audio recordings lays bare your likely goal to chop them up, distort them, and use them for partisan political purposes. NBC News and other media organizations are suing to force the release of the audio on the grounds that it's part of the public record. Different, but unlikely to prevail in that sense either. The transcript is also a pretty valid representation, and the part of the difference here, of course, is while it's got a different kind of interest, the news organizations, NBC News and the other organizations, are interested in it as a matter of being a part of the public record. The transcript will serve to inform the public record. And to the extent that they say, now, normally, if you were prosecuting a case substantively about what Biden had done, if you were trying to charge him with intentional removal of these materials, you could make the case that the audio of the interview is the best evidence of what transpired between Biden and her, and that the transcript only reflects part of it. And that's certainly true for NBC News' interest in it, too. Are there nuances that might be revealed on tape that aren't revealed in the transcript? Yes, could be. Is that important enough to the public record? Well, the test that the judges usually use to decide is, well, you have to make, in a court case, you have to make the best evidence available, unless something else stands in the way. So maybe let's hear the arguments why you want to have the tape. Well, what about in the news reporting scenario? There's no, judicial doctrine that says that the power of the federal judiciary shall be used on behalf of the press, the private press in the country, to leverage out the best evidence for their stories. No, that's not a thing. For the best evidence in a court case within our jurisdiction, yes, that we can use our power to compel the release for. A news organization wants to have the tape? No. Well, we think it will help us sell the most cars, says the Auto Dealers Association. So we want to have, sorry. That's just not something that the court has an interest in. Prosecuting the case in the best possible way? Yes, we have an interest in that. Reporting on the case in the private news publications? It's nice. It's probably best for democracy if you get the best information, but leveraging the court's power in order to get you sources? No, that's not something we're going to do. Just so long as there's something on the record, there's a law that says it's in the public interest for you to have information. There's a Freedom of Information Act. Now you have the information about what was said. And by the way, you're a print publication. Here's the print version. Well, maybe the TV wants to, or radio wants to put up the audio. Well, maybe, but there's no compelling interest for the state here in doing this. So they just don't. All right. Let's see. With this in mind, the NBC News reported that the White House's move all but eliminated the possibility that Garland would be prosecuted for ignoring the subpoenas. That is, asserting executive privilege. That triggers something new here. DOJ policy. When executive privilege has been invoked here, and we can't release the tapes because of executive privilege, the Attorney General, very unlikely to say, I defy the president's imposition of or invocation of executive privilege here. I am going to prosecute myself for not violating executive privilege, for not deciding to violate executive privilege. That's just not going to work. So there's that wrinkle as well. As he writes it, again, with this in mind, NBC News reported that the White House's move of asserting executive privilege all but eliminated the possibility that Garland would be prosecuted for ignoring the subpoenas. It's also unheard of for Justice Department prosecutors to go after the head of their agency over a contempt issue. House Republican leaders and their members are well aware of the obvious details. They know their resolution will be ignored. They know their gambit has been exposed as a partisan stunt, but GOP members nevertheless wanted to scratch a partisan itch, so they did. The public can expect to see a great many House Republicans boasting on conservative media and in fundraising appeals about their willingness to get tough with Garland, even if the contempt resolution doesn't amount to anything. So, all right, another good point made there. And there are other places I wanted to go here, but some decisions of the Supreme Court being issued. One of them is a good smack at Matthew Kacsmaryk, which is good news. Max Kennerly reporting or discussing this decision. Gabriel Malor, I don't know if I got that pronunciation right, is the first one. I guess is one of the first ones to get a hold of screenshots of it disseminating it on social media and saying the first SCOTUS decision of the day is the mifepristone case. The SCOTUS unanimously decides, opinion authored by Kavanaugh, holding that the doctors group, this is good basic stuff here, by the way, the doctors group challenging the 2000, 2019, and 2021 FDA approvals. Remember what this is about, right? There was a doctors group that said the FDA's long-standing approval of mifepristone was improperly issued, and we want to see it essentially decertified nationally. And Matthew Kaczmarek said, yep, okay, that's fine, even though mifepristone had been tested and approved and on the market for 25 years. Well, guess what happened? I'll read you the decision here, the piece that's taken from the screenshot. Justice Kavanaugh delivered the opinion of the court, and it reads, in part, in 2016 and 2021, the Food and Drug Administration relaxed its regulatory requirements for mifepristone, an abortion drug. Those changes made it easier for doctors to prescribe and pregnant women to obtain mifepristone. Several pro-life doctors and associations sued the FDA, arguing that the FDA's actions violated the Administrative Procedure Act, for one thing, that the approval was improperly rendered, but the plaintiffs do not prescribe or use mifepristone. Remember, they're anti-abortion. And the FDA is not requiring them to do or refrain from anything. Rather, the plaintiffs want FDA to make mifepristone more difficult for other doctors to prescribe and for pregnant women to obtain. Well, guess what? Under Article 3 of the Constitution, a plaintiff's desire to make a drug less available for others does not establish standing to sue, nor do the plaintiff's other standing theories suffice. Therefore, the plaintiffs lack standing to challenge the FDA's actions. It was pretty obvious, as Max Kennerly puts it. This will be held up, by the way, as, look, SCOTUS isn't political, which overlooks how the case was outrageous and absurd in the first place. Kaczmarek and the Fifth Circuit brazenly violated basic principles of standing taught to every 1L, as they call them. That is a first-year law student, a 1L. It shouldn't have made it this far. And that's basically true. But here we are, announcing that the Supreme Court had to intervene in a basic and blatant act of judicial idiocy. Matthew Kaczmarek turned standing doctrine on its head to be an activist judge, to legislate from the bench, to make rules about FDA approvals from the bench, in complete contravention to everything that we've got on record about how these things have to be treated, and just said, to hell with it. Yes, doctors who don't like to use this drug can also say nobody should use this drug. And I will issue a nationwide injunction against its use. Two enormous oversteps in authority. But he knew that he would be able to kick it up to the Fifth Circuit. And to the Fifth Circuit, because they're also crazy, would say, yes, we approve of this. And then it'll go to the Supreme Court. And the hope was, well, there's 5 anti-abortion votes, 5+ perhaps, anti-abortion votes on the Supreme Court now. Maybe they'll just do that thing we want to do and ignore the fact that in order to get there, we have to overturn some really major league judicial precedents and canons that govern everything we've ever done and everything we ever hope to do in the future. I mean, if we just disarm standing jurisprudence like this, no one will be able to predict anything. Of course, there are some people who thought that's what we're aiming for. But yeah, I mean, I think Max is probably right here. People will point to this and say, look, a unanimous decision on this, they're not as political as you think they are. Well, it could just be a setup for the thing that comes next. But I'm glad they did this. This is good news. And it does argue for the fact that there might be some sanity left on the court. The fact that it's unanimous is rather amazing, too. I could see it just as well being a 7-2 thing. But, the fact that it isn't is good news. But again, we're celebrating Hooray! The Supreme Court recognizes something that every first-year law student recognizes as obviously true. Thank God they, didn't go crazy and just say, fine, you're all pre-wrong. They could have. They might on something else later today or later on in the month, but they didn't today, and so that's good news. Let me see. Greg sent me a note here, and we'll see whether it's about the same case here. He sends me a link to the Threads postings from Professor Melissa Murray, who says the first opinion of the day, yes, also same case, is FDA versus Hippocratic Alliance, the medical abortion case. As we first predicted, she says, on strict scrutiny, the court holds that the petitioners lack standing to sue. Again, not, terribly insightful, given that, as Max points out, most first-year law students would have come to the same conclusion. But don't breathe easy yet. This case will be back before SCOTUS with better plaintiffs as soon as possible. That's a good warning. Let's see. Live updates. Justice Supreme Court upholds broad access to abortion pill. Got it. Okay. Thanks for the update, Greg. Yes, that's all holds together. I don't see anything that shakes that. It looks like Pope Hat is on the trail of another of the decisions. Is it a new one? Let's see. I think he might be just getting ready in case another decision comes down the pike. Okay. So now let's use a little bit of our time here. One, we'll want to catch up on what Rosalind McGregor has queued up for us, and I've been sitting on for a long time. Speaking of Republican criminality and, their interest in federalizing every state case brought against former presidents. What about state cases brought against people who aren't presidents, but who are nonetheless important Republican figures? Guess what? There's news on that front, and I've been sitting on it for a little while, and it's time to bring ourselves up to date on it, because Rosalind's got some more rounds in the chamber coming up next. But maybe we'll have to save those for Friday or forward. But let's get caught up so that we don't have too much backlog in the way. Let's roll it.
Good morning, David.
Good morning.
You and your listeners will remember the turbulent times right after the November 2020 election results. In particular, you may recall how Trump invited Republican Michigan Senate leader Mike Shirkey and Michigan House Speaker Lee Chatfield to Washington. I recall seeing photos of Chatfield toasting with expensive champagne in Trump's D.C. hotel. Fortunately for Michigan, Chatfield was term limited out of state elected office, but now he's back in the news. He's been charged with a bunch of felonies. The Michigan Advance and writer Anna Liz Nichols brings us the details. Former Michigan State House Speaker Lee Chatfield, Republican from Levering, and his wife, Stephanie Chatfield, were arraigned recently in an East Lansing court as the pair faced numerous felonies after the Michigan Attorney General's office accused the pair of using various schemes to embezzle nonprofit money to fund luxury vacations and lavish purchases. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel announced that investigators from her office found that between February 2020 and April 2021, the Chatfields used Chatfield's Peninsula Fund, which was registered as a nonprofit social welfare program, to pay off $132,000 in largely personal purchases, such as a family vacation to Universal Studios in Florida, a $32,000 trip to the Bahamas, and purchases at retailers UGG and Coach. Chatfield served in the Michigan House from 2015 to 2020 and was elected as Speaker for the last 2 years of his term. Nessel outlined findings from the investigation in April, saying that Chatfield was found to have written a check to his brother from a political account, the Chatfield Majority Fund, which then was used to fund the vacation to Universal. Stephanie Chatfield's charges stem from the Attorney General's assertion that it was her role to make payments from the Peninsula Fund for personal expenses. Both Chatfields entered not guilty pleas. East Lansing District Judge Molly Greenwald set personal reconnaissance bonds for the Chatfields that do not need to be paid, as she said the pair were not a flight risk in the case, but ordered the pair to turn over their passports to the court. The Chatfields are scheduled to be back in court for a probable cause conference in June. The embezzlement charges came from an investigation into sexual assault charges filed by Chatfield's sister-in-law. Rebecca Chatfield came forward in January 2022 with accusations that Chatfield had repeatedly sexually assaulted her for over a decade, starting when she was 14 or 15 years old and a student at Michigan Christian Academy in Burt Lake, where Chatfield used to be a teacher. His father, Rusty Chatfield, is the superintendent of the school. During the Attorney General's investigation into the allegations of sexual violence, evidence of financial wrongdoings came to light, Nessel has said throughout the investigation. The investigation has also led to similar financial crime charges being filed against former top aides to Chatfield, Robert and Ann Minard. The investigation into possible financial crimes committed by Lee Chatfield is ongoing, Nessel said back in April, but the investigation into reports of sexual assault by Chatfield brought by his sister-in-law has concluded and no charges are being filed. Rebecca Chatfield's attorney, Jamie White, said in a statement the day of the charging announcement that his client was shattered to learn that no charges were filed in regards to her reports of sexual abuse. Lee Chatfield controlled all aspects of the family's finances, White added, and any assertions that the assaults were actually a consensual affair between two adults goes against everything we know about adults grooming children. As you like to say, David, here we have even more proof that every Republican accusation is a confession. Back to you.
Yes, well, it happens all over the place, and I don't think removing that to federal court, even if it were a thing that you would do if you were a federal official, would help them at all with that. But I don't know. It doesn't have anything to do with the removal idea. But just once again, not only criminality at every level, but it just seems like the same crimes over and over with these guys. Anyway, just wanted to bring you up to date on that. And well worth keeping an eye on those things, and it really helps color our understanding of Republican accusations against Democrats, and the things that they have to deflect from will, I guess, very often determine what they pretend they think Democrats are guilty of elsewhere. All right, that brings us also back to another potential story, which, potential. It's a real story, one we haven't discussed yet, and we need to. The non-sexual abuse part of it, I guess that's where the investigation started with Chatfield, but ended up on financial crimes, and, once again, the same things over and over again. But that brings us back to something we mentioned earlier in the week. ProPublica reporting on Justice Thomas and the evolution of his financial worries, and the weird story of him that began, the retelling of which began with him sitting on the beach at the 5-star Sea Island, Georgia resort, wondering where all his money has gone. Why am I in so much debt? And shouldn't they be paying me more? And why did I just take a $250,000 quote unquote loan to buy an RV and then not take a vacation in the RV, et cetera, et cetera. And, the whole premise of this story was, well, we have so many new and increasing expenses. For instance, we've taken in our great nephew and we're raising him, and we have all the attendant expenses. And I was saying, well, one part of the problem was the attendant expenses of sending him to expensive private schools, which he didn't have to do necessarily. Although now that decision, at least in sending him to certain of the private schools that he was sent to, begins to make a little bit more sense, but it should be understood in a greater context. There's some reporting today that maybe the obligations that the Thomases felt in taking on raising this great nephew weren't so influential for them after all. Business Insider and New Republic both have a version of this story. The Business Insider, well, both of them are relatively short. Let me put it to you this way. Business Insider's report on it. Clarence Thomas raised him, quote, as a son. This is the headline here. Now, in light of the Hunter Biden story and the kind of hay that Republicans are looking to make of it, might this be of interest to anyone? Now, this young man that they raised as a son is facing 25 plus years on weapons and drug charges. Whoops. Well, that seems weird and hypocritical. But then, of course, the pardon power doesn't actually rest in Clarence Thomas's hands. So I want to raise, but I also would like the pardon power. Can we do that? Can I throw out his case? I don't know. That's not what he's looking for, though. Clarence Thomas is apparently done with this guy as well. So, Business Insider gives us a chance to summarize things easily with some bullet points. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas says he raised his grandnephew, Mark Martin, as a son from the time Martin was 6. The result being, I don't know, he's facing a 25-year prison sentence on drug and weapons charges. Revelations that billionaire Republican Harlan Crow paid for Martin's education have fueled a scandal engulfing the court, and Martin now faces decades in prison and says Thomas has refused to speak with him for years. So those are the highlights of the Business Insider version of the article, but there's also a quick take on it from, let's see, to head back to Pocket for it, from the New Republic, who reports on it this way. The headline for their piece: Clarence Thomas's, quote, son breaks silence from jail. Mark Martin, the man raised by Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas as a son, is speaking out on the sad truth of their relationship. The man that Clarence Thomas said he once considered like a son now says that Thomas doesn't want much to do with him. I guess at the minimum, a clear contrast. Someone gets in trouble, Clarence Thomas washes his hands of him. Someone else gets in trouble, Joe Biden stands by him. Sad to see him sentenced in the judicial system, but hugging him and supporting him nonetheless. Mark Martin, the grandson of Thomas's sister Emma Mae Martin, spoke to Business Insider from a jail cell in South Carolina and said that the Supreme Court Justice and his wife Ginny don't have a relationship with him anymore, despite being his legal guardians from age 6 to 19. They were just able to, wash their hands of him, I guess. Martin, who is awaiting trial on drug and weapons charges after he was arrested last summer, benefited from gifts Thomas received from conservative billionaire Harlan Crow, which the Supreme Court Justice initially failed to include in his financial disclosures. I haven't really heard much from them in a long time, Martin said of his adoptive parents. I tried to communicate with them a couple of times, but I've never gotten any response. In 2007, Thomas said in an interview with C-SPAN that he and his wife were raising Martin, then 16, as a son. Martin would attend a military prep school, Randolph-Macon Academy, and Hidden Lake Academy, I think we heard about that one, a residential therapeutic treatment center, plagued by allegations of abuse, by the way, thanks to Crow, a Randolph-Macon alumnus, paying the tuition at both schools. Thomas did not report either of those payments on his financial statements, and I know that's an awkward construction of the sentence. We'll skip over it for now. I guess they looked into Randolph-Macon Academy because Harlan Crow actually graduated from there. So I guess that was behind their decision to send me there. We're raising him as a son, far away from us. And then, apparently, he helped finance the HLA trip, too. That is when he was enrolled in Hidden Lakes Academy, which, okay, all right, it's a residential treatment center. It's a trip. It's a diversion from regular schooling. He was clearly having some trouble then as a young man. But the issue here is that Thomas has said, oh my God, raising a son is hard. Let's stop doing it. But let's also take in bribes to help us not do anything with the guy. In other words, if we raise him as a son in our house, that's very hard to do. We need money to send him away elsewhere. Can you give us that money? That's a little bit worse. ProPublica reported last year that Thomas had enjoyed luxury vacations, of course, on Crow's dime almost every year, and Thomas failed to report those trips until just last week. In addition, the publication reported on Crow funding the renovation of the home where Thomas's mother still lives, as well as Martin's private school tuition, estimating that the school fees likely exceeded $150,000. Martin told Business Insider that he enjoyed a privileged childhood, traveling to more than 20 countries and spending summers wakeboarding or water skiing. He also remembers babysitting Crow's son when their families went on vacation together. But Martin said that when he began high school, Clarence and Ginny Thomas just didn't have the time to deal with him anymore and sent him away to boarding schools. After his freshman year of high school began, Martin said he rarely saw his great aunt and great uncle. And it's beginning to sound like maybe being sent away at a young age might have led to some of his problems. I don't know which came first. Where's the chicken? Where's the egg? According to Martin, he was expelled from Randolph-Macon Academy after his junior year for failing a drug test. And he said the Thomases then sent him back to his mother's house in Georgia. It wasn't that they said, well, all right, we'll have to send you to a treatment center. They sent him back to his mom. And then maybe they later said, what the hell, let's see if we can't get him in line here. He said he rarely heard from them since. Last year, Martin was arrested and charged with drug trafficking and weapons possession. According to Business Insider, Martin's car was stopped as part of a juvenile sex trafficking investigation. But he doesn't face any charges related to that. Well, that's an unusual injection of child sex trafficking investigation charges into the story. Martin also faces charges pending from 2021 on allegedly trafficking meth and heroin. Business Insider reported, citing arrest records. Martin faces at least 25 years in prison over the drug charges, 5 more years for illegal gun possession. I actually don't know if they know that I'm locked up. I'm not sure they'd care too much, Martin said. I've probably seen them 2 times, maybe 3 times over the last 14 years. I just wish they'd at least communicate with me, get to know my children, Martin added. They raised me like another mother and father, so I wanted my children to know who raised me into the person that I became. I don't know if they want to be known that way. I want them around for that, at least, to see my kids grow up. Thomas didn't respond to Business Insider's request for comment, but it's not likely that he would have offered any acceptable justification for his and his wife's treatment of someone that they've referred to as a son. Thomas still refuses to speak about the unethical gifts he's received and adamantly refuses to resign from the Supreme Court despite all of his ethics scandals. Sadly, it seems that Martin's life has been a casualty of Clarence and Ginny Thomas's service to the conservative movement. They didn't have time for him, but they wanted to have a family around in order to show that they were pro-family and, pro, I don't know what, right-wingism in general.
NetRootsRadio.com.
So they got tough with him.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning.
And then, of course, they cut him off because that's what families do. All right, well, we're not going to cut you off, not from the news and information that you need here on Netroots Radio, because Justice Putnam brings you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next with more. What have we missed? Well, for starters, Jared Kushner's dark past resurfaces, and MAGA is working hard to cover it up again. Find out more about that next.